I didn't come out in that job because it was going to be popular. I came out in that job in order to keep my job and be able to finish putting my children through school. Right up until my coming out, I expected to be homeless. I expected the worst, partly because I had childhood trauma associated with fears of abandonment and fears of rejection. You're in the presence of fear, but you're moving forward because you feel you need to survive.
Today's conversation is about something that I think a lot of people spend their entire lives or much of their lives avoiding: the gap between success and truth. My guest is Katherine Dudtschak, a former senior executive at RBC, former CEO of HomeEquity Bank, one of Canada's most accomplished business leaders, and now the author of Sincerely Katherine. At age 50, while leading thousands of employees in one of the country's most visible corporate roles, Katherine publicly affirmed her gender identity. And in doing so, she triggered a question that goes beyond gender or identity politics. How many people are living lives built around expectations that they never consciously chose? We live in a world that is very, very focused on achievement and productivity and image, but what does that actually cost us if it's not true to who we are? And why does reinvention, particularly midlife, feel so threatening? So today we're going to be talking about leadership and conformity and the tension that exists often between success and internal alignment. I'm J.R. Lowry. This is Career Sessions. Katherine, thank you for being with me today.
It's wonderful to be here with you, JR, and all of your guests.
I appreciate your joining. So you've got a new book out. It's been, as we're recording this, I guess about 6 weeks. So you're still kind of in the relatively, there you go. Thanks for putting it up there for those who are watching on video. Sincerely, Katherine. You describe what many people would consider to be a successful life before you realized that something was missing. Something very important was missing for you, and you made a very visible personal transition while in a big leadership executive role. How did that change the way that you view authenticity in people, particularly those who are in an executive leadership role?
It changed a lot. I'll give you some backstory, JR. I was known as a fairly empathic leader before June 17th, 2019. And the reason I share that is it was around year 2000 that I definitively cried at work the first time. And I think of human behavior as either masculine behavior or feminine behavior. There are feminine and masculine attributes in every human being. It's just, there's a unique mixture in each of us. So we would describe showing sensitivity or emotion at work as a feminine behavior, not female, but feminine. And if you looked at my essence in childhood before my parents and community and school tried to shape me into behaving a certain way or performing a certain way, I would have been a fiercely curious human being. I would have been a sense-making, systems-thinking human being, which are more mechanical or masculine characteristics, and I would have equally been highly emotive and highly sensitive and expressive. So I started to embrace my more sensitive side in around year 2000. So I got to be known as a fairly empathic leader. When I affirmed my gender in 2019, I had come through a 24-month period of deep, heavy mental health challenges. I was suicidal the year before I came out.
Yeah.
I thought it would have been better for my life to be over. I'd built the perfect career. I had 4 beautiful children, a marriage. It was the perfect life in materialistic terms, yet I wasn't feeling complete. So I went through a really dark period. And then a friend pulled me aside who could see my symptoms. She's a psychologist or psychiatric nurse. And she said, "Do you want me to send you research on the intergenerational trauma caused by suicide?" And she literally walked me off the cliff.
Wow.
And then I ultimately made a pledge to myself to come out in my job leading 25,000 people at Canada's largest company. And I was in one of the most senior executive jobs in the country. I didn't come out in that job because it was going to be popular. I came out in that job in order to keep my job and be able to finish putting my children through school. Right up until my coming out, I expected to be homeless. I expected the worst, partly because I had childhood trauma associated with fears of abandonment and fears of rejection. And everyone was saying, "Oh my God, you're going to be met with such love and such embrace," yet I feared the worst. And so what happened, JR, in that moment of my coming out, or of the video going out to the world, is I started to receive hundreds and eventually thousands of emails from people about bravery, about courage. Neither of those are sexy words. Like bravery or courage is really about moving forward with something you know to be true, yet fearing the worst. You're in the presence of fear, but you're moving forward because you feel you need to survive. And so I expected the worst, yet I got all these emails about bravery and courage. And then people started volunteering their own life stories to me. Aspects of identity that they had hidden from the world, aspects of hurt and hardship that they had never told anybody about. Yet they're writing me, and they were from all walks of life. A gentleman from the East Indian community talking about ostracizing his best friend in India who had told him he was gay, who later took his life because he was put into an arranged marriage, and he carried that guilt forever. Women talking about emotional and physical abuse from a former spouse. The stories were countless. And so the fact that I was fairly empathic before and trusted, and then I showed high vulnerability in my coming out, resulted in me being met with a level of trust that humbled me to the core. And because of the kindness and the empathy and the embrace that I received, and because of the kind of trust I received from others telling me their stories, this gets to the root of your question. I was forever changed as a human being. When you get to see into the soul of others and they trust you with such vulnerability and to be embraced the way that I was, it's pretty damn hard to go and be a command and control manager after that. It's pretty hard to be a dictator after that. I was immediately changed. I could no longer be directive in the way that I might have been in the past. So I learned how to suspend my own anxiety and my own fear of meeting targets and expectations as a manager. I learned how to suspend that and shift my manager approach or leadership approach to kindness and curiosity that would lead to empathy for what people are sharing with me. And I became a much flatter leader. My executive team would tell me they knew what the root cause of a problem was we were trying to solve, and it didn't feel right intuitively to me. So I would go to the frontline employees and say, just tell me what's really going on here. And the frontline employee would go, well, it's this, this, and this. And I go, and what should we do about it? We should do this, this, and this. And then I'd go back to my executive team and I'd go, we're not listening. We're not showing empathy and listening effectively to the people that know the best. And so everything got turned upside down for me because I saw a side of the human condition that I didn't see at scale before. That there's so much hurt or conditioning that occurs that causes people to not share. And I just became so much more compassionate and empathic and curious that my leadership style changed forever to being much more human-centered and much more heart-centered. And the funny thing is our business performance was record-breaking through the entire period of that.
Obviously, it's significant personal change for you and in what you revealed that day, but also in what happened afterwards. Having now reflected on that, and it's been 7 years roughly at this point, do you feel like the corporate world is evolving, or are they still stuck in this mode where leaders need to be these personas and can't be their authentic selves?
Yes and yes. Both are true. There are pockets of light everywhere, of humble, selfless, heart-centered leaders that lead with kindness and curiosity, show empathy and compassion, take input from all levels, all corners of the organization. That's what inclusivity is. It isn't fancy. Yes, it takes psychological safety and belonging, but really it's about getting everybody's input to come up with more holistic solutions. So there are leaders like that everywhere. Many of them are flying beneath the radar, not because they're shunned necessarily, but because the organization and senior management is under so much pressure to perform that nobody really takes enough time out to see and understand what makes this more human-centered, heart-centered, inclusive, compassionate leader effective. And so there are bright lights everywhere. And there are also, and I saw it, at senior levels, the most senior levels, there are very human-centered, planet-centered senior executives and CEOs. The challenge we're dealing with, and I think it's a Western world, if not global, societal issue, is for a long period of time, we have built a world that is extractive and performative. We've been on a path for several thousand years that have created this consumerism, capitalistic, extractive and performative world that we live in. It's not good or bad, it just is. And that extractive world has quarterly performance targets, quarterly reporting, risk management, board governance, a set of linear, logical, mechanical practices that keep CEOs and senior executives on this performative treadmill in order to keep the governance and the risk management and the production of the organization moving. And it takes a lot for a senior executive to be able to pause that and embrace more regenerative and more coherent ways of leading and running a business. And even the attempts of ESG have been pushed backwards. And so it's hard. There's great people everywhere and great intentions everywhere, yet they often get masked by the performance pressures within an organization from the top down to perform and to deliver. And it takes a very conscious leader or a very aware leader who's conscious of their own behavior and their own tendencies to create enough space to pause the anxiety associated with that performative way and create enough space in their day and in the way that they lead to be more human-centered and heart-centered. It's why, JR, that I speak at sincerely about the pathway to a regenerative world and a coherent world starts within. It starts within the leader ourselves in order to create calm and peace within ourselves so that we can shift from anxiety or fear-based ways of being to kinder, more curious and inclusive ways of being. So both are true. So is it shifting? Yes. Is it at the pace it needs to? I think in order to save humanity and our relationship with nature and the planet, I don't think it's moving fast enough.
Yeah, a lot in what you just said. I think both the notion that the way that we approach leadership has flaws, but also obviously the broader environmental consequences of it. Talk a little bit more about what that journey was like for you as you evolved your own leadership style and discovered that you could lead people in a very different way than perhaps you had been leading up until that point.
So I'll give you 3 or 4 data points.
Okay.
So the first time I cried at work was around year 2000. A gentleman that was reporting to me, who I idolized, who I was junior to at one point, now I was senior to. We were doing their leadership review and it called out that they were risk adverse and they were pensive as a manager. And I said to him, "You're called out as risk adverse. Where does that come from?" And he trusted me and he started to cry. And he said, "Every time my parents took a risky decision, they failed. And as a child, I promised myself I would not take risks that would result in failure." And he's bawling his eyes out. And I started to cry because I felt his pain. And I also felt that he trusted me with a side of himself that he had not shared before at work. And so that moment for me was the beginning of learning to slow down and get to know the whole human being that you work with. And that it's okay to cry at work. It's okay to be sensitive and to be vulnerable. That went on. I led the restructuring of a bank across 19 countries in the Caribbean. I was the CEO. And the restructuring by the board was seen as wildly successful. The company went from losing money to back to sustainable profitability in less than 24 months. The board was blown away, yet I was heartbroken because in these small countries of the Caribbean, we reduced 40% of the workforce during that period as part of the restructuring. And employees didn't trust management anymore. And they were going to the media. And I said to somebody, we need to tell them the truth that we're losing money. We need to tell them the plan to restructure the company. And the person says, well, we'll tell them when we're done. And I go, no, they're adults. They deserve to know. And so every 6 weeks, I'd have a call with 6,000 employees, eventually 5,000 and eventually 4,000. And I would cry with them because I'd get questions and I didn't have answers. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry this is hard. And I'm sorry this is heavy. And I promise you, I will do everything in my power to save this company and as many jobs as humanly possible. And as soon as I was honest and vulnerable, and I would cry alongside the employees, not out of weakness, just out of feeling, they stopped going to the media. And employee engagement on the team over that 24-month period went up over 20% at the same time we were restructuring. So again, I learned that it was okay to be human. It was okay to be vulnerable, and that everybody deserves to be brought on the journey. And then I came out, I went through my own personal transformation. Now it's not a corporate transformation. And I was met with the level of love and kindness and trust that I shared with you earlier. And it really changed me. I had to lead in an inclusive way with compassion, less command and control. I focused more on inputs or activities and behaviors, less on financial outcomes as a leader. And again, we went on to achieve record performance. And this was kind of the turning point, is I'm now living in a woman's world, not a man's world. I'm worried about being judged for being too feminine and too sensitive. And I was carrying that. Yet I became kind of an enigma. And at that point, I was mid-50s. And at that point, I made a decision to leave. Amazing company I spent 37 and a half years at. Yet I had grown so much as a human being, neurodiverse, lived in a man's world, lived in a woman's world, grew up as a poor farmer to war-surviving immigrant parents. And I had made sense of all of this stuff. But I got to a point where I said, I need to leave. And I needed to leave because so much had changed for me that I needed another chance to meet new people where they're at and have them meet me where I'm at and move forward from there. So in that case, I chose to leave a company I had spent many years at in order to not start over, but start clean, start from a clean place. And I wanted to prove to myself that myself as a woman and also as a heart-centered leader, that it wasn't a fluke. And I became a CEO of another bank. And within 60 days, 90 days, we were achieving record performance just by showing compassion and sensitivity to employees and giving them permission to come together and work side by side with their peers to come up with creative solutions. And the company's mission was all about improving the quality of life of aging people 55 years of age and older. And we started to achieve record performance. And again, this more compassionate, heart-centered leadership worked. And I just needed another chance. So I just wanted another opportunity to prove it. As you know, JR, I've since moved on from that. And now I've set up my own company called Sincerely. But there's 3 or 4 events in my career that grew me, that opened my heart and opened my mind to a more compassionate, inclusive way of leading, where I learned to suspend fear and anxiety. But it didn't happen overnight. It's about going on a journey of inner discovery and self-discovery as a manager that brought me through that, call it 15-year period, to the point that I'm at today.
Listening to everything you're saying and thinking about what you said earlier in the conversation, Katherine, about the fact that we're in a culture where there's all this pressure to deliver, constant quarterly pressure to deliver. But I think in the scheme of things, if I think about the way that most leaders need to perform is a piece of it, but I think a bigger piece of it is the lack of willingness to do the inner work. And so we end up with these cultures. I'd love to get your view, having observed things from multiple lenses, living as a man, living as a woman, being able to see how a change in leadership style played out in your case, at least. But it feels to me like we're living in this kind of regime of command and control and top down and managing through fear and all those things that you've mentioned and threaded in through what you've brought up so far, that a lot of that persists because people just aren't as willing to look within themselves and find a better, deeper, richer way to lead.
Totally. And it starts with looking within. And it's also important to be kind enough to ourselves and realize that this extractive and performative world is all around us. It's been built over several thousand years, and it's been intensified in the last 50 years in a way that's become almost unimaginable and would appear to be unsustainable, because in the world we're living in today, the level of social fracture and the level of economic divide between countries or people and the level of planet degradation and the level of overwhelm of information and disinformation, those four forces combined, social, economic, planet, and volume of disinformation and information, is unmanageable for any human being, I believe. I don't think we were built to deal with that much anxiety and pressure from the outside world. And it doesn't just exist at work. I have 4 children. If there's one thing that my former spouse and I did well, is we did not jam our children into an excruciating schedule of extracurricular activities. We would go visit family in the country on most weekends, or go to a family cottage where we would hang out in the wilderness and the outdoors as a family. And because I have 4 kids within 4 years, they became best friends with each other. But we did not have this performance intensity day and night. We had some relief in our life. And so this idea of an extractive and performative world is all around us. Consumerism is a byproduct of it. The way companies run is a byproduct of it. So this going inward is more than being a manager or a leader. It's a human journey. It's a human journey to say, I am not at peace with the level of pressure and anxiety that exists in my life because of family, because of spouse, because of my job. I want to go on a journey to calm my nervous system and find some peace within me. And so I think taking the time and space to go inward and be reflective is more than management. It is about life. It is about going back, finding your way back to your true essence as a person and finding a level of inner calm and inner peace within you. So I describe the world we live in as extractive and performative. I describe the world we have the potential to move towards, which is regenerative and coherent. And what I mean by coherent is a world where the human being lives from their essence, their essential self, through their physical and inherited self, genetics, outward through our lived experience. And most human beings, back to performative, are taught from a very young age to suppress parts of our identity to fit in. Don't be too expressive, Katie. Don't be too sensitive, Katie. Learn to talk with a deep voice. Don't be creative. Perform. Most of us have aspects of identity we suppress throughout our life. And that creates a level of anxiety within our nervous system because it's not natural. What we have is a society that values our education or our job resume, might value whether you're male or female, but it doesn't really value what are the unique human traits of JR. And so moving to a world that is regenerative and where you as a human being are more aligned and coherent involves going inward to revisit that inner child and learn to love and like the parts of yourself that your parents might have told you weren't appropriate, or your teachers might have told you weren't appropriate, and to heal that and to ultimately create habits in your life that calm your nervous system, like meditation. And so I meditate now twice a day. I lead a very quiet life. I used to go from 6 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night every day as an executive. That doesn't happen anymore. So making conscious choices to go inward and learn to love yourself and to create peace and calm within yourself is a human journey that leads to coherence that actually allows you to become a better leader and also a more whole and complete human being.
Now that you're doing what you're doing with Sincerely and have shifted out of the corporate world, you're out speaking and writing on this. What are you hearing from people about how to practically incorporate some of the things that you're talking about into the way that we run our world day to day?
A few things, and I'll be tight. One is it's never too early to go on an inner journey to start. And whether it's learning to meditate, whether it's hiring professional help, I'm a strategic advisor to leaders and businesses. I'm a storyteller. I'm not a therapist. So surrounding yourself with the right professional help or healers or mediums, surrounding yourself with 2 or 3 people that you admire, that see the best in you, that you can confide in, that are friends, that are not going to take you into pity city. And creating some habits around wellness, whether it's yoga, whether it's Pilates, meditation, creating some of those habits in your life that help you calm your nervous system and tune into yourself is step 1. And you can never start too early. The second point is it takes time. My journey, because of the complexity of my journey, was at least a decade long.
Yeah.
And, and I said back to 2020, if you put a performance expectation on your inner journey, you're going to just exacerbate what already exists in your life. Don't do that. So start now and build the community, build the professional support, build the practices, and be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself that it's a journey. It's part of your lifetime. It's not something that you deal with overnight. And the third thing that I would say, so at Sincerely, I am launching my own podcast. I'm the host of a global podcast called The Sincerely Show. And everyone that I'm interviewing is living a life of service or contribution. They're all doing interesting things for their local community, for humanity, for our planet. Every one of them has been through an awakening of sorts. Every one of them has been through deep darkness. And it's mind-blowing that as humans, so many of us have to go through deep mental health challenges and what I call collapses of our ego, of our fabricated identity in order to awaken into something that is more whole and more complete, in order to feel spared and to dedicate your life to contribution, to service to humanity and to our planet. And so the reason I share that as a common arc of the people that I'm meeting and interviewing is it's a metaphor. Well, it is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, but it is a metaphor for the human journey. Like an inner journey can be hard. It can involve collapses. Sometimes it involves divorce. Sometimes it involves other forms of upset. It doesn't need to be about affirming your gender. It can be heavy. And so the sooner we build mental health practices and wellness practices, and the sooner we learn to love and live in alignment with that inner child, the less harsh that upset's going to be, because they can be hard. They can be heavy and they can be hard. And that would be my advice for people. Those would be my lessons I would share with people.
I mean, it sounds overall like you are saying that if you have conviction that this is really about who you are and what you believe in, that going through whatever upheaval that it causes will be easier. And I use that word with a lot of trepidation, that it will at least be easier for you to feel that you are doing what was necessary and right for you. If you don't necessarily build that conviction, I'm sure it's much harder.
Yeah. I think in every human being, again, depends how spiritual you are, love is real. I know it in the core of my being that a human being's innate ability from our essence or our soul outward is love. It's innate. Fear is the opposite. It's a conditioned human trait. Yes, we needed fear, survival instincts to put food on the table and to defend against the saber-toothed tiger. Yet the extractive and performative world has fed off of anxiety and fear of being good enough to perform to a point that it's dominated our life.
Yeah.
So it's almost become fabricated and embedded within the human psyche to a point that we've lost the ability to create calm in our life and space in our life to be coherent, to realign. And so I'm saying this from the standpoint of your word conviction is I think anybody listening that is on a journey to be a better manager or better leader is because something in you knows that you're not operating from a place of balance or from a place of wholeness. And somewhere in you, you want to be loved just as much as you know your employees want to be loved or cared for or nurtured. And so I think that's the right place for conviction to come from.
Yeah.
Conviction from ego will be met with some form of a human breakdown or collapse. Conviction from this place of a deeper calling that you want a world that is more inclusive. You want a world that is kinder. You want a world where we live harmoniously with self, each other, and nature, and that you believe deep within you, to your point about conviction, that it's worth going on that journey, because if not us, then it's going to be up to our children or the next generation. And if that's where the conviction comes from, which I think is what you meant, JR, then I absolutely say, yes, that is the right conviction, because it's from a place of service. It's from a place of wanting to leave the sandbox better than it was when we took it over.
All right. Well, I think you've left us with a lot to think about today, and I sincerely appreciate your candor, your authenticity, and what you are now turning to do in service with sincerely. So thank you.
Thank you, JR, for the invite. Thank you for what you're doing, because it matters. We're human beings, and there's an opportunity to be the most full and authentic version of human beings possible. And I think that's what you're pursuing, JR, and I applaud you for it.
Yeah, thank you. All right. What would I like you to take away from the discussion with Katherine just now? Probably most importantly is that success and alignment aren't necessarily the same thing. I think one of the most powerful ideas from everything that Katherine said, and there was so much there, is that success often coexists with internal misalignment. She reached a point in her life prompted by depression and suicidal thoughts where she realized that she needed to reveal who she really was to the world. She did it in a very brave fashion to thousands and thousands of employees across the company that she was working for at the time. And she heard back from people things that they'd never revealed to anybody else. People were willing to share with her in a very vulnerable way because she was vulnerable with them. And it begs the question of how many people are out there living lives that really weren't the lives that they'd intended, living identities that really aren't who they are or who they want to be. So that to me is one very powerful idea from the episode. Second thing is just this idea of how leadership can be very different than the way we often perceive it. Katherine, by virtue of now living a woman's life, had to adopt what she felt like was a more feminine way of leading. And in doing so, she realized that that command and control fear-based approach, not that she necessarily would have had that in the past, but that approach was even more different from what she really wanted to be than perhaps it had been in the past. And so she started to lead more through compassion. And that's been a revelation for her, as you heard her describe. And so again, it kind of raises the question of, can we bring more of this into our leadership approach in a way that will be better for our employees, in a way that will really help them connect to themselves and to us as leaders and to the organizations that we represent without sacrificing performance? As she said, these things are not necessarily at odds with each other. And then finally, just as this idea about the extractive, performative world that we live in, and the notion that we should really slow down, live more as we were meant to be, live a more regenerative life, both for our own mental health, but also for the broader collective health of the human population and the planet that we live on. This ultimately is playing a big role in what Katherine is now doing with Sincerely, as she says, living a life of service at this point and trying to deliver this message again and again, that there is a different way to be thinking about the way that we act, the way that we lead, the way that we interact with each other, and the way that we live on our planet. I hope you also took away some other lessons from the conversation. I invite you, as always, to subscribe to Career Sessions on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube. And if you found this discussion enlightening, sign up for my membership community, Pathwise, and my newsletter, Path Wisdom. Thanks. See you next time.